Good evening, world. My name is Con, and I am the Conversationalist. Usually it's morning and here in Adelaide, and usually my drink of choice will be a latte, but seeing it's evening here in Adelaide, I'm having a cheeky little scotch after dinner.
Ooh.
Um, so I'm really, really excited and privileged to have my guest all the way from Lexington, Kentucky, US of A, Eric Hughes. Welcome, Eric, and it's 5:30 a.m. where you are, I believe.
Yes, it is. It's a little bit early for me. We kind of talked. I'm a little bit of an early bird now, and so it's early. My choice of drink. I'm working on water right now. I'm not much of a coffee drinker or a tea drinker. It's just get up and go. And so
I'd be a little bit concerned if you were having a scotch at 5:30 in the morning, mate.
I would be too, but it sounds really good right now. I mean, you're holding up your glass, and I'm like, I could see
Yeah.
myself doing that right now. It's like, oh, let me go pour some real quick.
Yeah. Eric, again, thank you for your time. And I usually do my programs normally a morning program, but obviously given the time difference, I'm doing an evening show, and I'm really happy to do that. I just want to give the viewers a bit of context on how you and I kind of met. We're both part of
Yeah.
a Facebook group, a men's group, and you posted about your male's perspective on miscarriage, and I was intrigued by that. And we connected, and for some reason, I assumed you were in Australia, and lo and behold, I discovered you were in the US. Now, not that that makes any difference, but I guess it was just interesting. I, and again, just to give the viewers some context, and I'll let Eric tell his story. He's a wife has had a couple of miscarriages over the years. And I'll hand it over to Eric. So Eric, take us back to, I guess, back to the beginning, so to speak.
All right. So back to the beginning was with my son. We knew that my wife had something called endometriosis, and she had a couple of other health problems as well. And so, we met each other, we fell in love, we got married, we were having fun, living life, and then we decided to think about having kids. And we had always kind of talked about having two kids. And me and my brother were 2 years apart. Her and her brother are 4 years apart.
Okay.
So we kind of understood a little bit of a gap, and we're thinking, oh, we'll find something in the middle, maybe.
Yep.
So we started talking with our doctors. We started talking with different people just to kind of see the process. And they told us we'd have, possibly complications, possibly different things that would go on. It would take a long time. So, start now and don't hold your breath and just see how things work out. And so she ended up getting off some of the medications she was on. We waited, 2 or 3 months, make sure everything was good. And then we started to try for our son. And lo and behold, the first month, boom.
Bingo.
And all of a sudden we're like, oh, okay, this was pretty easy. And we didn't have any issues, didn't have any complications. The pregnancy went off very smoothly. And, our son was born. There was just a little bit of complication just in terms of delivery. We were in the hospital for 3 days before we had C-section because he wanted to come out, but then didn't want to come out. And we wanted him to come out, but he decided he didn't want to come out. And this was December, we checked in on December 19th to the hospital, and we finally had him on December 22nd. Right. And so we're like, we want him as far away from Christmas as possible now. Yeah. And so, but we didn't have really any issues. We didn't have any complications. Everything went smooth. Everything went great. And so our son was born. We were having a good time with him, and we were raising him. We were having a family and enjoying that. And we started thinking about, okay, when do we want to have our second? And so we were looking somewhere around the 2 to 3 year range. And so we just were like, hey, we've done this before. We're going to go ahead and, there's nothing new. So got off birth control, made sure medications were good. And we started trying again. And within another month or two, we found ourselves pregnant. This was about a year and a half to 2 years after when my son was about 2, I think. And so we were right in our timeline. Everything was going to schedule. We were super excited. And, we had just announced to some close friends and the family that we were pregnant. We'd just kind of moved into a new town as well. And so we had only been there about 6 months. So we were kind of keeping things a little under wraps. And everything looked to be good. And my wife, she's about, I think we're about 9 weeks along, still in the early stages.
Yeah.
And so my wife, she had a girls' trip planned. And so she hopped on an airplane and went to New York City for the weekend with a bunch of her friends. And let's see, somewhere in the middle of that trip, something didn't feel right. Something was off. And she started spotting, she started bleeding. She didn't know what was going on. We knew that, she had been pregnant and that this was something that possibly could happen, but she just felt something was off.
Yeah.
And so she hopped on a plane early and flew back to Kentucky. And that evening we ended up in the ER, and they were doing an ultrasound. They're like, oh, well, we can still see the fetus that's inside, and it looks like you're about 5-6 weeks along. And we're like, no, we're about 8 to 9 weeks along at least. And they go, no, you're about 5 to 6. And we're like, we're pretty certain we're not. And so they did a couple of tests, and it was like 4 or 5 hours in the ER because the person that's supposed to do the test, they couldn't get a hold of, and they had to call somebody else back in. And it's just like this traumatizing experience of, why am I bleeding? What's going on? You're telling me different information than I know. Well, we came to find out that she had a miscarriage. And it was real shocking for us. It was really just one of those experiences to where we're like, okay, we've heard kind of this happening, but we never expected to have it. We never expected any of this to go on. We didn't know what to do. What was the process? Well, with my wife being still somewhat early, she didn't have to go in to, get a full clean out. And they're just like, well, just let your body pass. It'll just pass through your body. Your body will take care of itself and you'll be good to go. And we're like, we don't know what that means, but okay, we'll go home and we'll just see what happens. Well, for the next, probably month, it was just every single time my wife would go to the bathroom, there was just more blood, more clots. And it was really like emotionally, it was like bringing up the scars almost every single day of the fact that we had a child that was developing, that was growing, and then it wasn't. And then it had died. And now my wife's body was trying to take care of it.
Yeah.
And it was just, the emotional toll was just extremely high, especially on her, of, what was going on, and it was in her body and just the different changes. And then they told us, every 2 or 3 days she had to go get tested to make sure like her hormone levels were dropping and everything was going well. And so it was just for this month and a half, it was extremely emotional, just the whole process of what's going on. And so my wife dealt with it differently than I did because, it wasn't happening to my body. There was a lot of times where I didn't see what she was doing or what was going on. She was at work a lot of times. And so, she was processing and experiencing these things on crazy swings. And for me, mine was a little bit more level, especially during the day when we weren't together. I had no idea what was really going on until maybe that evening, and she'd have, another episode or another clot. And then I could kind of see some of the emotional toll that was taking on her. For me, I was able to kind of, a little bit more just straightforward of like, okay, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We had a child and then we lost the child, and there's nothing we can really do about that now. So just kind of, I was a little bit more moving forward in my steps. It was easier for me to grieve and to move forward in that process. And then, lo and behold, 2-3 months later, I find out we're not on the same wavelengths. Like, she's still an emotional wreck. She's having a hard time just overcoming this experience and the long drawn out aspect of this experience. You know, she went through, you know, probably a good 2 months in total of just this entire from start to finish of miscarriage and completely having her body take care of things, doctor's appointments, and just all of that. And so I found we were completely in different emotional spaces. She would get upset about why I wasn't crying more and why I wasn't shedding tears. And it just seemed like I had already gotten over things. I really didn't understand what she was going through or some of the aspects that she was taking care of. And so I was like, well, I'm fine. You know, she's not talking about it, so she must be fine. So everything's good. And
it wasn't.
Not.
Not. What support, if any, was available to you at that time? Like, was the attitude, well, you know, it was only 8 weeks, so, you know, it wasn't really a baby. You know, was there any of that?
We'd gotten some of that well, you were still early in the process, so don't worry about it. You can have another one. You can always try again.
Which isn't really helpful.
You know, no, not at all. You know, there were some, you know, the cliches of, oh, well, it wasn't just meant to be, or, you know, things like that, that people say that, you know, they're trying to mean well intention wise. And it's like, yeah, that just doesn't, let's just not talk about it. There was different emotional and physical support systems. We were kind of in a newer town, so we really didn't know a whole lot of people, just a handful. We'd had a few people reach out and kind of just share a little bit of their story about miscarriage, but it was something not a whole lot of people talked about, not a whole lot of people discussed. And especially like right as it happened, and we kind of, you know, not a whole lot of people knew we were pregnant. And so it's like all of a sudden we're like explaining, well, we were pregnant and then we had a miscarriage. So it's like, surprise, we were pregnant, and surprise, we had a miscarriage. And so people kind of like taken in the fact, oh, well, we were pregnant, and then all of a sudden find we're miscarriage as well. So they were having emotional swings and weren't kind of sure what to do. And a few people shared their stories with us. But after a week or two, you know, it was kind of like everything had died down and everybody went back to normal lives and different things. And so all of a sudden it was like we had support for a week to 2 weeks, and then
gone.
It was like, okay, well, you know, everything's good now. Yeah, exactly. Everything's good. And people kind of just go, you know, went on, and here we were just left kind of struggling with it. And so for the next couple of months, it was one of those things we really didn't discuss a whole lot. It was kind of out of sight, out of mind. We tried to figure out, well, what went wrong, what was going on, and we'd go to the doctor, and they told us, you have to have 3 miscarriages before we'll run testing on you.
You have to have 3 before they'll run tests.
Yes. Okay. And so because
that's clearly something you want to be doing, isn't it?
Exactly. And well, and from a medical standpoint, I guess from there, so it's like, well, miscarriages happen quite often. And they're like, well, a lot of people don't realize they have a miscarriage. It's just something just takes place. Most people don't realize it, or when people do realize it, there's just other complications, this or that. There's specific genes that women can have that can make them more susceptible. And so they kind of give us all this half information. And then like, well, we really can't do anything, you know, for insurance purposes for that. We really can't run any tests on you to tell you what's going on or what happened until you have 3 of them. And we were just completely dumbfounded. We're like, how many people have to have 3 miscarriages before somebody will say, hey, this is what you should be doing? It's just frustration around the whole entire thing. So we're kind of in this space. We're frustrated, we're sad, we're grieving, we're kind of trying to get back to life as normal.
A whole range of emotions.
Yeah, we have a 2-year-old that we still have to, you know, love on and to care for. Absolutely. And so, you know, we just continue on with this. And we later that year, this was 2016, later in November, it was one of those we weren't, I don't think we were actively trying to have another child, but we weren't preventing having another child. We're just kind of leave it up in the air and to see what happened,
Yep.
we found out we were pregnant again. And so this time was a little bit more, we were a little bit more cautious. We were a little bit more aware of kind of the possibilities of what could happen. And so we had this emotional swing of, well, we've had our son who was, we didn't have any issues, and we've had one miscarriage right now. And people are like, well, you know, once you have one, it's more susceptible to have more.
Geez, that's
so
encouraging.
We go through, yeah, it is. It's wonderful. We go through, you know, our process. We found out we were pregnant. We, you know, took an extra test to make sure, yes, we are. We started tracking things. We wanted to get into the doctor sooner this time, and they told us, well, you can run your standard, you know, 8 to 12 weeks, somewhere in there. And so we go through the whole process again. And I think it was late December, like almost around New Year's Eve, we find out that we have another miscarriage on our hands. And so once again, it's like all the undealt emotions with the first one just like start like a wildfire. It's like the pump is primed, and it takes off. And so both of us we're just an emotional wreck. Again, we'd only kind of told a few people. This time our circle was even smaller just because of what had happened last time.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden this happens again. And, you know, at least we have a family doctor this time. We have a little bit more of a support system. So we kind of reach out to people again, and we kind of get more people supporting us. And we kind of start this grieving process. And we know a little bit about what it's going to be about in terms of the length of time and all of this. And so it's over Christmas season, it's over New Year's season. It's not a good time.
I was going to say,
you're going to have a.
I was going to say, there's never a good time, but certainly Christmas, New Year is definitely not ideal.
Exactly. And then my son's birthday is on the 22nd of December. So it's like we're going through this whole process, and I'll actually, I'll wind the time. It was about a week and a half before, let's see, it's about a week before Christmas. Scheduling wise, my wife's a teacher, and it was like the last week of school before we take Christmas break. And she actually, she started having symptoms at school. And she decided to stay at school, and so it's like that kind of compounded on it. So then we have this Christmas break. We're just devastated again. You know, we've had 2 miscarriages, both within the same year. We tried to talk to the doctors about getting tested something, and they're like, no, you have to go through one more. And we're like, we don't want to go through one more. We don't want to. I mean, why do we want to put ourselves through the ringer again? And you know, it kind of, that whole definition of insanity of like, you know, doing things over and over again, expecting different results, but not having any kind of different input. We're like, this is insane. And you know, at the same time, a couple of about 3-4 weeks later, one of our good friends who was pregnant, she ended up having her child, and he was only alive for 10 days. They had complications with the birth. He was in ICU for 10 days. They had major issues, major complications, and then he passed away.
Wow.
And so this, on ours, it was one of those, you know, we're still grieving our first miscarriage. We're now actively grieving our second miscarriage. And then one of our really good friends, we're now actively grieving kind of a death of a child, a 10-day-old. And that, you know, kind of overshadowed our grief a little bit, because it was huge. It was one of these things, you know, you get a call, so-and-so's going to the hospital, she's having complications, her due date is in like a week and a half, 2 weeks. So it's like, baby is like here. And then to find out just the problems that had taken place, and to do 10 days of, you know, ICU, trying different things, warming and cooling, and the whole community coming around it. And so it was one of those, you know, I was her pastor. And so we were actively in support system. And, you know, we're trying to grieve silently, so to speak, because we're actively trying to help and just everything just comes together. And so their little boy passed away in February. And so
sorry.
like it was kind of, for us, it was like just level upon level upon level. And
Eric,
so
I guess, yeah, I guess there's nothing, the words can't describe, you know, how you're feeling. And for those watching, and not, people say, oh, well, you know, you don't know what somebody feels like until you've walked in their shoes. We had a daughter 30 years ago, as I was saying to you before we started recording, and Stephanie was born at 6 a.m. and passed away at 10 p.m. And the emotions are just like, it's just, you can't explain it to people. You just can't explain it. And again, what was really interesting from your post about how men in general may grieve differently, but certainly how you processed it. I know there was a very, very different, the way that I approached it and the way that my wife at the time approached it and processed it and things like that. What can you tell our viewers? Were there any, what strategies, if any, or what, your suggestions for somebody that's been through this or going through it to help them get over is an awful word. We don't get over things. We need to deal with them. We need to deal with them and continue on. What did you do? And I guess more importantly, what did you do that you felt was unique to the way that your wife processed it?
Yeah. So after our friends had their miscarriage, for me, I can compartmentalize pretty good, which is both an asset and not.
Yeah.
And so with this, I was able to compartmentalize to where I could set my grief and my experiences aside, because I needed to help my family, my friends, family and their family, and then community at large. And so I was actively helping them through grief process. And it finally dawned on me, well, why can't I help myself through this? And so I started taking some of the tools of the steps of going through grief. And I had to actively remind myself that grief is something that you experience, and it's not something you can just say, okay, I'm going to deal with it and I'm going to get over it, and it was a one-time thing and I'm going to move on. It's an active process, and it comes up at the most inconvenient times. And so for me, it was learning how to not take those emotions and just stuff them down and saying, I'll get to them later. I'll get to them a more convenient time. I'll deal with it at some other time. I really had to tell myself, like, if I was in a space and an opportunity to where I could actually experience these emotions, I had to let myself experience them. There were times to where I would just be out and I'd see a little girl or a little boy, and I would have, tears starting to well up and these things. And I would have to tell myself, all right, I need to, I want to hold it together. And then I would go home and I would have to tell myself, I need to experience this. It's okay. And it's good. And it's healthy. And I would just sit there and just cry. I would be in my bedroom, I'd be on the couch, and just, I would allow myself to experience just the welling up of these emotions. And just by giving myself that permission, it helped the process. It helped my body be able to grieve in a physical sense. From a mental standpoint, what really helped is we were able to actually find a clinic to run some tests on my wife to find out she has a specific gene that makes it difficult for folic acid to be able to get into the fetus as it's growing and to be able to develop. And so what you need to do is you need to take a baby aspirin a day and take a different type of folic acid. That was it.
That was it.
That was
That,
it. Take a baby
wow.
aspirin to kind of help thin the blood a little bit, to allow nutrients to get past the mucus plug, and take a different type of folic acid that would be easier to process on the body.
So you did that. Obviously, you pushed and you found a clinic that was prepared to do those tests to give you that information that's vital.
Mm-hmm.
General process was you needed to go through another miscarriage before they would run those tests.
Yeah. So, and that's what,
Wow.
and we got to the point of like, we are not doing this. And, and of course, when we went and we got the tests run and they came back, hey, this is all it is. Like, we went through another grief process again. And this, like, sometimes you have different emotions that come up on grief. You have anger, you have just overall sadness, you have, you know, sometimes fear, sometimes you have loneliness, you have this gamut of range. And this time we had anger come on into it when we found out the results. It was like, we were happy we kind of found out, but at the same time we were like super angry. And then from angry, we went into like extreme sadness again, because it was something so simple that
something
could have
preventable for the second one.
Exactly. And then we do research about it. We find out like almost half of women have this gene, this mutation kind of thing. And so then we're like, then we had like compounding grief of how many people out there have gone through the same things we have gone through, when a simple blood test could have told them this and could have helped prevent, you know, miscarriages and all of that kind of stuff. And so for me, it was the whole grief process. It was not like, okay, I grieved and I'm done. It was a continuum. It was, I had to learn how to incorporate these experiences into my story, into who I was, and to say, okay, this happened, and here is how I felt. I was sad that I was, you know, going to be a father again, and I didn't get that chance. And what does that mean? And I had to, you know, tell myself that it was okay to experience these emotions welling up when we'd go by and we see a family that had two kids playing with themselves, with each other, and we still only had one. And it was these different trigger points that I learned not how to stuff down, but how to experience and how to allow my body to say, yes, this is sad. This was a grief, you know, the grief came up, and to be able to walk in and through that grief and then to keep going. It's, you know, it's not like it ever goes away, but through time, you can learn how to, I don't want to say manage, but you can learn how to walk in life with the grief, and how you create a new normal, so to speak, of knowing these experiences will come up, these triggers will happen. And when they do, you tell your body and you can say, okay, I'm going to experience this, and you turn it from sadness into, you know, joyous memories if you can, or just however you can process moving through the grief process. It becomes easier the more you do it. It never goes away. I mean, people like, you just grieve and it's just this time period and then it goes away. It never goes away. It will always be with you. And
it's interesting you talk about how, you know, you would see you know, families, you know, with two kids and whatever, you know, for many years, people would ask me how many children I had, and I would only ever say two. And it's really only been the last probably 5-6 years where I say three. I say I've got a son, 31-year-old son. I have a beautiful daughter who's 29, and, you know, we had a little girl in the middle who, unfortunately, you know, passed away the same day. And it's not, you know, I don't say these things because, you know, I'm looking for sympathy, or, you know, and invariably the reaction is, oh, I'm sorry. Well, I didn't, you know, that's great, thanks, but that's not why I said it. It's more about acknowledging this part of my life, this person who was my child, who I didn't get the the pleasure or the, whatever you want to call it, to actually enjoy and grow up. And I think for me is acknowledging that really helped me with not getting over it, as we spoke about, but getting through it. And I had a lot of bottled up stuff, which, again, this isn't about me, but just to, put things in context, that, we do things differently, and all it is really suppressing that you spoke about, rather than, and it's not helpful. It's not helpful in any way, shape or form, because eventually it's a bit like somebody described it like a beach ball trying to hold it underwater. You can hold it for a while, but eventually it's going to pop up and it's going to smack in the head.
Yep.
So dealing with it is important. Eric, what I'm really interested in also is, I know the dynamics that I had with my wife at the time, how she processed it and how I did. What challenges were there, I guess, between you and your wife in terms of your relationship, going through this period?
I'd say the biggest challenge for us was communication. We, it's so funny. You're like, oh, well, we had been married for, 4 or 5 years. We should have been able to communicate easily with each other. And in certain things and certain regards, we can, but around this, we'd never been through something like this. And so it was, how do we openly communicate with each other in a way that is not judgmental or accusatory or down-putting, is more inquisitive, but at the same time realizing that even within our marriage together, like I was being reserved. I was bottling up things for me. It's like, well, I don't want to tell her what I'm going through because I'm trying to be strong for her, and I know she's going through a hard time. And then she was getting upset that I wasn't crying. She couldn't see me cry. She couldn't see me grieve because I was doing that on my own in certain instances, because I didn't want her to see me like that. I didn't want her to see me showing that much emotion or crying or that weakness, so to speak. Society can kind of,
that perceived weakness in males, that perception that we need to be strong, and if we demonstrate emotion, whether it's crying or sadness, that is a reflection on our strength as individuals.
And so we had a lot of tension points because she started getting mad at me in some instances. She couldn't see me grieve. She couldn't see that I was sad. And so she would start, talking to me about, well, how are you already over this? Why isn't this taking you longer to go through, this process? Here I am, she's an emotional wreck, and it, obviously for different reasons of experiences, I was able to separate myself from the cleansing process and the bodily that goes with it. But from an emotional standpoint, it was one of those to where part of my grief as well, and part of my suppression, is to numb, finding something to numb the pain, because I don't want to experience it, I don't want to have to face it. And so, it would be where I would just plop down on the TV, on the couch, and watch TV for 4 or 5 hours. I just binge watch TV shows. And and so I would deal with it in different ways, in terms of, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to suppress it, and I'm going to find something else to do instead of dealing with that. And here she was, and so it affected my work, it affected my relationships, but it was just one of those disconnects that I was afraid to show my emotional side to her. She was desiring and needed me to show some emotion, so that way she could have a connection point of saying, okay, we're in this together, we're processing and we're going through this grief together, and at least we're on the same page. And I'm like, I don't want to show you my page. And she's like, here it is, here's everything of mine, where are you at? And I'm like, I'm over on the TV, that's right.
Well, I was going to say, we'll talk about it later. Honey, can you move away from the television?
And so we really and it took intentionality, is what it is. It took intentionality of her telling me, it was okay to show emotion. She needed to see me show some emotion because she was getting mad and upset and frustrated with me that I wasn't showing anything. So she didn't think I was grieving. Like it was, oh, you're already over and done with this. You've already moved on. And I'm, you're at the finish line and I'm back here,
I'm back at the start line.
Exactly. And so we had to take time out to where, it would just be an evening and it would just be the two of us, and we'd sit on the bed and we would force ourselves to talk about our experience or what was going on. And we had boxes of tissues around, and it was one of those, I had to it was a really weird experience. I had to force myself to allow myself to cry in front of her. Because it was like, I can't show this emotion. I can't let her see me cry. I can't let her see me this vulnerable. And I had to really work on getting over that. And when we finally started to be able to, when I started to be able to connect on that level with her, that actually helped her grieving process as well, because it let her know we were in this together. We were grieving together. We were going through these ups and downs. I was just doing them completely silent or pushing them off. And so now that I started that process together, we grieved on our own in different ways, and everybody does. And to realize and not to have expectations, but we also needed to grieve together as a husband and wife who had just lost a child. And so as we started doing that together, that actually helped our individual grieving as well.
And I think it's fair to say I'm certainly not a relationship expert, nor do I purport to be. One of the things that I've learnt over the course of my time is that one of the biggest, strengths or things that we as human beings, in our relationships, whether it's, with our relationship partners, with our children, we need to be able to have discussions and communicate, and it needs to be like without judgment, as you said earlier in the conversation. It's not about blaming. It's not about, accusing. It's just having a conversation with no judgment and just let's see where it goes. And I wish I had those skills back then. I mean, when we lost Stephanie, we ended up in a group that was filled with couples that none of them had been what we had been through. In fact, they were all, from memory, they were all families that had miscarriages at varying times in the birthing process, and we had empathy for them, but it didn't help us. We wanted to be able to communicate with somebody on the same level, and that's one of the biggest things is being able to have that support network. Eric, I want to ask you, it's so that was 2016, I think you said, 2017?
2016.
2016. So here we are, 2020, and 4 years down the track. Number one, firstly, do you have other children?
Yes. So the story continues. Once we found out that my wife just needed to take a baby aspirin, and that she just needed to take a different type of folic acid, we found out. Let's see, it was July of 2017. We were pregnant again, and my wife, it was a high-risk pregnancy. She'd had a C-section before, so we already knew we were going to do a C-section, and just through health, through previous miscarriages, that kind of stuff, we took it easy. We, there were some points to where there'd be a spot here or there, and massive anxiety attacks would take place, and have to kind of talk ourselves off the ledge of going to that thinking. But things for the most part went well, and in February of 2018, our daughter was born.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so it's just, it was the entire process in between having the two kids was, it was filled with so much sorrow and grief and sadness and anger and some bouts of depression and just so many different emotions. And then to finally, we were able to have, our daughter, and that's, we just wanted to. And so, it was one of those to where we told ourselves when we found out we were pregnant with her, of like, this was our last chance.
Yep.
For us. Like emotionally, we don't want to put ourselves, and even after the last miscarriage we had, the second one, we came to a point where like, we're only going to try this one more time. It's, we physically and emotionally did not want to handle just continuing to try.
Yeah.
We had already talked about possibly looking into adoption and other things as well.
Yep.
And so we're like, we'll give it one more go around and see. And so, so my daughter was born in 2018, and she's 2.5 now.
Fantastic.
And even now, it's still one of those to where, it's, we love our kids, and at the same time, it's different memories will spark. And even now, like my son sometimes will ask different questions of if, we talk about certain things, and we've actually come to the place to where we can talk to our son, and we can, when people say, well, why'd you have such a large gap? We can say, well, actually we had 2 miscarriages in between. And we've come to that point to where we can talk a little bit more open about it. We've worked through enough of the grief process to where we can have conversations, and we can try to now start supporting others. But also through this process, I guess one thing I meant to say was, in terms of the grief process as well, one of the best things you can do is find an outlet to express your grief. And for me, that was my biggest thing, was finding an outlet to express my grief. So I would play some music, like I play on the guitar. I would just do different writings and different things. And I ended up writing a poem, basically about the miscarriage between, it was a poem basically of after our second one, of how we said goodbye to our second miscarriage, and then tied it in of saying, we know we'll see you again one day. We know that we'll experience you when we get to heaven. And by the way, say hello to our other child, kind of thing. And so it's a beautiful poem. It's one of those things I can look at it now, and I can, I put so much of my emotion, so much of my grief into this writing. And it was almost kind of like a completion type piece for me, of putting it down on paper and getting it out of myself, so that way I wouldn't keep it in, and I didn't keep it bottled up, but I put it out there. And when I put it out there, I felt just a weight come off. And so that was how I was able to help just through my grief process. And even now, just reading that poem will still just bring tears to my eyes. And I'll still have moments of the, what ifs, of what would life be like, of what would, what would it be like? And that's kind of what's in this poem, of like, what would it be like to hold you and to kiss you and to love on you? And what would you look like your mom, or would you look like me? And how would we, and so it's a bunch of what ifs. And then it was also kind of a releasing process of saying, okay, I went through this, and there's nothing I can do about it. But I'm still going to carry you. I'm still going to, I'm still going to remember.
Just an interesting question, and I guess it's definitely a what if. I know you don't have the answer, but I'm curious as to your thoughts. Having had your daughter subsequent to the 2 miscarriages, has that helped you with processing those miscarriages, or is it? Do you separate the 2 events, and never the twain shall meet? Does that make sense?
Yeah. We don't separate them, because when we look at the 2 of them, it's hard not to see what would the middle look like. And so just in life, it's one of those to where they're all connected, because of the experiences we went through. But having our daughter, I think, helped give us some closure to the miscarriages. We achieved the goal of having a second child, and in reality,
along the way.
We started to kind of, as you said, we started to kind of change our language around it, of like, we only have 2 kids. Well, technically 4 kids, and we've lost two of them.
Mm.
And so we've kind of started changing how we speak about it a little bit, and that helps. But also just having the closure of, we were able to have that, our child. We were able to have her and to actually hold her, and we're experiencing life now with both of them. And so it kind of was like, it was a good closure point of, okay, we went through these miscarriages and we went through this period of our lives in this time, but we found out information along the way, and we found out vital information along the way to be able to get us to the point of having our daughter. And so we still grieve and we still go through these emotions, but at the same time, there's still some closure about it, because we were able to have our child finally. And I know there's others out there who don't get that. And so it's one of those, it's like, I'm extremely thankful that we were able to have our daughter.
Eric, when I started my little conversationalist segment many, many months ago, it was actually at the beginning of COVID, and a friend asked me what my motive was, why are you doing it? And at the time, I was interviewing business professionals and people in business, and it was really about how they were dealing with the situation, business, family. And my view was that if the information that they provided or shared with the audience, if it helped one person, it was absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
What I've got out of our conversation is your story is so, so, so important. And I want to thank you so much for sharing and being open and being vulnerable. Even that one little piece of information, that folic acid thing, if there's somebody out there that is unfortunately has experienced a miscarriage or doesn't have the answer or whatever, who knows, this may have helped one family, and all the other information about how you processed it, and your relationship and things like that. There are so many people out there that suffer in silence and don't even look for the help. And unfortunately, we find within our own family, as you said right at the beginning, they're well-meaning, but their language and what they say to you is really, really not productive, and it's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. Eric, it's now 7:52 p.m. in Adelaide, which means I reckon it's about 6:30 a.m. in good old Lexington, Kentucky. Am I right there?
Yeah, we're at 6:22 right now, and
6:22.
The house is still silent. I haven't woken anybody up yet, which is good.
Good man. Good man.
Yep. We'll start the craziness of the process of getting everybody up and ready to go here in about another 20 minutes, and then it's full on chaos, and it is.
And mate, it's a great chaos. I got to tell you, I look at my grandchildren now and the age they're at, and it's just it's one of the best ages. Eric, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Given that it was 5:30 a.m. your time, we did have a little few hiccups because I couldn't read your email address, but that's another story. Thank you so much, and I know that what you've shared and what we've chatted about will be so helpful to so many other people. My name is Con. I am the Conversationalist. It is 8 p.m. in the evening, and as I said, I'm finishing off my nasty little scotch. Good evening to everybody in my side of the world, and good morning to everybody on Eric's side of the world. Mate, you have a wonderful day, and bless you, and all the best with your family.
Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.